Hello, this is Rachel from the Shades of Orange. Today I'm here to cover all of the horror books I read in the month of December. Starting with adult horror, I read a couple books including Kin by Kealan Patrick Burke, and this I did as a giant buddy read with a lot of my horror friends. I did this buddy read with Shaun from Eclectic Reads, Stephanie from That's What She Read, Julie from A Girl on Book, and Mark with The Book Pit. So I'm going to have all the links down below. These are booktubers that share my love of the dark and disturbing books, and so it was kind of the dream team. I had a blast buddy reading. But to tell you a little bit more about the book, this book starts out with a girl escaping from a group of cannibalistic hillbillies, and the story starts out incredibly gruesome. The first scene was very intense. I found my stomach just churning at the aftermath of this horrific event. It was very intense and had some great body horror, which you know I love. I honestly had mixed feelings about this. The entire buddy read group had the whole range of feelings towards this book. Mark really hated it, and myself and Stephanie probably enjoyed this one the most. But this is a book that is really a bit more of a character study, analyzing what happens to a final girl, what happens after a horrific event occurs. And I had some problems with pacing. I found this book very character focused, which isn't always my favorite. I'm very much a plot driven reader. So I didn't find this book perfect, but at the same time, I give a lot of respect to a book that can make me feel things. So while it wasn't a perfect read, I'm definitely interested in seeing more from this author because I think he has some great writing chops. Next, I listened to the audiobook of The Lesser Dead by Christopher Buehlman, which is a fantastic take on the vampire story. This is set in New York City in the 1970s and follows a particular vampire. While this is a novel, it almost reads more like a collection of short stories or vignettes because each chapter is its own little self-contained story. He gives snippets of his life. The audiobook narration is fantastic. It's done by the author, which can be a bad thing, but in this case it was phenomenal. The author put on a fantastic New York accent, and I just found it really enjoyable to listen to. The book is very much character focused and is perfect for people who are tired of vampire stories that really romanticize vampires. The vampires in this one are gritty and dark. There is some difficult subject matter in this. There is harm to animals, and there's definitely some sexualization of the vampires, but not in a romantic way. Instead, they are able to charm people and bend their will, so there is some serious consent issues, and I thought it was just a really good, fresh take and was an enjoyable read. I wish it had been a little bit more plot driven because of the way the chapters were broken up. There wasn't really a cohesive narrative, but I still think it was very well done. And if it's something you're thinking about picking up, I do recommend it. It wasn't particularly scary, but it does have some intense scenes, harm to animals, and it's definitely something to consider. So if you're thinking about picking it up, you might want to go check it out for yourself. Now, over Christmas, I read Snow by Ronald Malfi, and this is a story about a man who is trying to get home to spend Christmas with his son. And the story starts with him at the airport. His flight is canceled because of a snowstorm, but he is desperate to get to his son and decides to rent a vehicle and drive the rest of the way through the snowstorm. He ends up going along with a woman, along with an older couple, and they go off into the snowstorm. And this is a fantastic winter read. It was a lot of fun. It was very entertaining. I didn't think the writing was particularly amazing. The plot maybe isn't the most original, but it was very well done in terms of survival horror, and I did enjoy it quite a bit. There's some really creative things that the author does with the elements of horror. The snowstorm itself almost becomes another character in the story, and I liked a lot of the aspects in it. I do recommend it if it's the kind of thing that you typically enjoy reading, and I just thought it was just a good Christmassy read. While it does have those elements of Christmas, you can certainly read it now even though the holidays are done. So that is Snow by Ronald Malfi. I also dabbled in some YA horror this month, and if you know my channel, I don't tend to read a lot of YA anymore, but I did find a couple of really good ones this month. The first being The Girl from the Well by Chew-Peco, and this is a bit of a nod to Japanese horror. It follows a vengeful spirit. She was brutally murdered and is now taking out her vengeance by going after other murderers, particularly people who have murdered other children. She becomes involved in a living boy who has some strange tattoos and some secrets of his own. And the story takes place partially in North America and also somewhat in Japan. I personally love stories with that Japanese angle. And while it wasn't incredibly scary, I felt like the author did some really cool things. The writing style was very fragmented, and the author used sound in some really unique ways. I thought this book had some great atmosphere and was just really unique. So if you're looking for a story that's just a little bit different, this was just a really good one to pick up. It was reasonably creepy and actually a lot of fun to read overall, so that was just an overall good book to read, and I was definitely glad I read it. The other YA horror book I read this month was The Merciless by Danielle Vega, and this one blew away my expectations. It was probably my favorite horror book of the month, which says a lot because I didn't really think I could love a YA book this much anymore, but this just was so intense. I didn't think that YA was allowed to be this dark and this gruesome. This follows a girl who befriends some popular girls at her new school, and they are concerned about this other student, Brooklyn, who they think is a little bit weird. They think something is going on with her. They are all very Catholic in their upbringing and believe that this other girl, Brooklyn, is potentially possessed by a demon and decide to do an amateur exorcism. And what transpires is the most crazy story. The story is so intense. It is very much a story of the terrible things that teenage girls do to each other. I've heard this book pitched as The Exorcist meets Mean Girls, and I do think that comparison really works. It is just insane. I saw some of the twists coming, but it was still so enjoyable to read. It was really intense. I actually thought there were some really scary scenes in it, and it just blew away my expectations. The book itself is really cute. It's this bright pink cover, and don't let that deceive you. It is just a phenomenal horror book, and even if you're an adult like myself and don't read a lot of YA, this is one I would actually recommend picking up. It was surprisingly dark, and you know I love it. It was disturbing, and I'm very excited to see more from this author, so I definitely recommend that one. Finally, I want to talk about a nonfiction horror book I read, and that was Paperbacks from Hell by Grady Hendrix. And this is a fantastic book that goes through the history of horror publishing. I learned so much about the different trends and the rise and fall of the popularity of different kinds of horror. This book is particularly focused on books published in the 70s and 80s. The author goes through different trends, and each chapter is focused on something different, from demons to creepy children to animal attacks. And he finds the weirdest books published. There are some bizarre books that it is hard to believe actually got published. And even though I do tend to read more new releases, this is the kind of book that is gonna make you want to go and pick up some of these old titles, and I definitely want to check out some of them for myself. Grady Hendrix is a great resource for anyone wanting to have a better understanding of the horror genre. He writes in a very fun, humorous way, but at the same time gives a lot of insight and really gives a good perspective into the different trends. I just loved it. I think this is a perfect book to gift to anyone if you're lucky enough to have someone in your life who is a horror reader. This would also make a great book that could be displayed on a coffee table if you're someone like me and loves to have something a little bit different. I thought this book was great. I did technically get a copy from NetGalley, but I ended up finding a copy at my library because it's kind of book that you really need to read in a physical form because it is just fantastic. The artwork is included in it, so you get to see the different covers, and I just loved it. I think it is pretty much a must read for any horror fans. I cannot recommend this book enough. I thought it was great, and apparently that is a piece of nonfiction that I can definitely get behind. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but that one was just fun, so easy to get into, and well worth your time. So that was it. That was all the horror I read in the month of December. I'd love to know if you read any horror last month. Please let me know if you're planning on picking up any of the books I mentioned. There were definitely some phenomenal books in the month, and I would love to hear your feedback. As always, thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon with the rest of my reading from December. Thank you and goodbye.